So our next presenter is Arno Simon. He is the Solution Director of the Chromatography Data Systems. Arno comes to Zifo from a company, Biontix, that was based out of Berlin and joined the Zifo family 2 years ago. Biontix essentially provides product and services for users of the Waters Empower, as well as the Dionex Chromeleon. So it is with further ado, I'm going to have Arno speak to us today on the experiences and learnings with implementing and managing large CDS. Over to you, Arno.
Thanks.
Great title, by the way.
Hello. As you have heard, I've got this presentation on a very short notice, so I need to have some readings when I help you as a presentation. And so I started my career with Waters. I was 10 years employee of Waters, worked in the service support and sales group. And afterwards, I left Waters in 1997 and founded my own company, Biontix. And our goal was to support users working with at this time, Millennium, later on Empower system, because we saw that a lot of people struggle when they work with on the complexity of the application. Did we have both microphones? As Margaret said, I sold my company in 2022 to Zifo. I think that I worked with Zifo in the time before, and I think that was really a good fit of the product portfolio because we are, as I said, we are very strong in the terms of chromatographic data systems, and that is something which was a little bit missing with Zifo. And for me personally, it was a good time point to sell the company. Yeah. What have we done with Biontix and now with Zifo in the past? I would say more or less everything with chromatographic data system. Our focus was Empower, because Empower is, I think, the leading application in the pharmaceutical market. And we work 99% of, or 99% of our customers are from the pharmaceutical market. As you can see, our experience is really from setting up new systems as really new systems or as a new system for software upgrades to validation of these systems to connecting new sites. And connecting new sites didn't mean only to install lace boxes in the laboratory. That also means to develop rollout plans to help laboratories with the development of SOPs and to train users. We also provide a help desk for Empower as a managed service, which is also not only covering the technical aspects of Empower, it also covers the support for customers when they need help for building calibrations, generating results, setting up sample sets, whatever. And we also help to improve efficiency of Empower by developing custom fields and reports for bringing calculations into the CDS or develop software add-ons. All of the CDS will have APIs to connect applications with it. So to develop add-ons or to interface the CDS with the LIMS system. When I was asked to give this presentation, it was really challenging to define the topic to talk about. And one question, who of you is using Empower? Only a few. So the goal was not to give you an Empower presentation or Open Lab or in Chromium presentation. So I was thinking about the projects we have done in the last 25 years and what we have seen, what might be challenges with these projects with our customers, and maybe to show a few of these topics. What we see when we work with our customers is that there will be mainly 3 different groups involved into these CDS projects. That is, on one hand, the IT group, who is responsible for setting up the application, keeps the application safe and running. The second part will be the laboratories, which have to implement the new software, to develop processes, how to work with the software, to write SOPs, to ensure that the results will be generated. And finally, the QA groups, who have to ensure that there is everything right in terms of data integrity, that everything is documented, and so on. And what we have seen is that a lot of companies have these 3 groups really as separate groups. So there is an IT group who says, I'm responsible for the deployment of the application. My goal is that the lace box is running, that the server will run with a specific feature release or whatever. And then there's maybe laboratories who decide we need to customize the application, to add fields, calculations, and whatever. And all these things didn't run in parallel. And I would like to show you one example, which mainly starts in the laboratory, but finally will more or less cover all 3 groups with them. And therefore, we will take a look at how results will be generated in the laboratory. First step is always there's a chromatographic system, HPLC, GC, whatever, and that creates a chromatogram. Next step is that chromatogram is evaluated. So at least once, sometimes several times, you need to process that chromatogram and then you create a result. Then, sometimes, the next step is that numbers out of that result will be transferred into an Excel sheet. Because Mpower will not really, or CDS will not really calculate the final number you need. Sometimes there will be additional calculations necessary for samples, but also for system suitability tests, for example. So when the Excel sheet is used to calculate the really final number, then the next step is that there's a form where you have to enter the standard deviation of your suitability samples and the additional values. And when you have all values documented, the next step is that you need your analytical method to compare your numbers with the specifications. So there will be 1.2% standard deviation, and the question is if that is okay to use these values. Nightmare is all these things have to be done twice. From the person who does the evaluation and from the second person who doesn't double check. That is one of the points where you can relatively easy increase the efficiency of a CDS when you start to replace that by functionality of the applications themselves. By the way, finally, you have to archive all these data, to store the data, and then to find the data in case of an inspection. How can we optimize a workflow like that? That is based on an example we have done, or a project we have done with Genentech in San Francisco. And our first step was to train the people in the laboratory. So the first step is to ensure that everyone understands the native functions from Mpower, that everyone knows how the processing, how the calculations could be performed with Mpower. The second step was that we take a look at the process, that we followed up the result from Mpower to see what will be the additional steps. And then we started to develop custom fields in Mpower who can calculate the final number to replace all the Excel calculations. In addition, we set up additional custom fields who do who makes the decision if a result is within or without a specification. And then the last step was to set up a report to make all this information readable. So then the last step is, with the new system, they acquire the data as before, they process the data as before, but now the processing includes all necessary calculations, so you will really find the final values. And as you can see on the sheet, you will also see the pass and fail information for, in this case, the different suitability tests. So therefore, the amount of manual work is dramatically reduced. The double check is much easier, and you save time because you didn't need to compare numbers with analytical methods. So the old process on the top, the new process on the bottom. As you can see, we have replaced the Excel calculations. We have replaced the form to collect the data, and we also replaced the need to compare these data with analytical method. And finally, we only have one report who contains all the information. In this case, the customer measured the time which was necessary to do an evaluation before we started our project and afterwards. And in this specific example, the time saving was 50%. And I think that is really a relevant amount of time you can save in the laboratories by replacing all these manual steps by using the opportunities of the CDS system. That would be something with a view from the laboratory. So now let's come to the larger view. Why is it also helpful to calculate final numbers in a CDS? So one reason could be, if you plan to connect your CDS system with a LIMS system, and you didn't replace these manual steps, then in Mpower or in a CDS system, you will not have the final numbers you will need for your LIMS system. The final numbers will be calculated somewhere else in Excel. So as a simple example, Mpower will calculate the content of a sample. In my really simple example, the results have to be divided by the number of tablets who will be combined for the analysis. So what you maybe need is the content per tablet, and that value is not stored in Mpower. That value is in your Excel sheet. So if you plan to interface your CDS with the LIMS system, and you still keep the manual steps in your laboratory, then you still have to enter values manually into your LIMS, or you maybe need a second interface with whatever you use for the calculation. That maybe will show a little bit that both groups have to work together. If from the IT perspective, there is a decision to interface the CDS with the LIMS system, and the laboratory will not update their processes, then that will not be really successful. When we talk about interfacing a CDS with the LIMS system, what else could be helpful?
Done.
More or less all CDS systems, as I said, our focus is Mpower, will allow to create user-defined fields. In Empower, they will be called custom fields. And custom fields could do a lot of things. They can do calculations, but they could also be used to store simple information. So a common field is a field to store something like a batch info. Normally, samples will only have a sample name, and it could make sense to store the batch number together with a sample. And the problem with the custom fields is that if there is no control about custom fields, then more or less every laboratory starts to develop their own custom fields. I had one customer, and they were requesting that we take an analysis of the custom fields and develop a concept to reduce the number of custom fields. And at this customer, I found 8 fields to store a batch number. So Charge is the German word for batch, for the German customer. And that's difficult. Imagine you will build an interface between a LIMS and a CDS, and you will send information from the LIMS system to the CDS to set up sequences or sample sets in Empower. If you have 8 fields which could be used, each laboratory will only use one of them, could be used to store the batch number, then it is not easy to transfer that information, because then you will have to specify for each project separately what is the name of the field where we have to store the batch number. That brings us to a second point, the number of projects. Empower organized data in projects. Project is like a box where you have all your samples, your methods, your results. And as you can see on the left side, that is a screenshot from the Empower project structure. It looks like the folder structure of Windows. And what we see is that laboratories, when they decided a system for the projects, that they have Windows folder in mind, and then they rebuild that in Empower. Really dramatically, when we move laboratories from the old Agilent Chem Station to Empower, there will be enormous project structure. If you would have to define for each project separately the name of custom fields, because the custom fields will be stored in the project, not in the whole system, they will be part of the project. And if each project will have different custom fields with different namings, and you will have to design a link between LIMS fields and Empower fields for each project, and you will have thousands of projects. That's really challenging. That's a lot of work. So it could make sense also from the IT perspective, when you start a project like interfacing CDS and LIMS, to ensure that the laboratories will not work with 1,000 projects, that they design a project structure which reduces the number of projects and again uses Empower functionality. Empower projects will be organized more or less like a SharePoint, where you can create different views. So there is normally no need to have hundreds of different projects. You can work with a low number of projects and then simply create views to see the data. If you would like to see HPLC data or GC data or the data from the last week or from the last months. So that maybe shows a little bit the relevance for the laboratory, for the IT group, and for the IT group and the laboratories. Maybe a few other things who could be helpful. We have we have connected several laboratories around the world to global Mpower systems. And more or less all our customers are working with the same process. If there is a laboratory which should be connected, the first step is at that site or laboratory to set up a project team. From the laboratory perspective, who will be member of the project team? The SME for the old application. So you will have, for example, an HLN Chem Station specialist, and the HLN Chem Station specialist is now the person to implement Mpower into that laboratory. Next step, normally, we will train them. So we will go there and we will have maybe 5 days training and explain everything, how Mpower works and is configured and all these things. And then the next task for the project team is to establish the processes in the laboratory and to write the SOPs how to use the application. And that's often painful. So the problem is that the people didn't have the experience with the application. And especially if you have someone who was before 15 years responsible and really specialist for an application, maybe like ChemStation, he will use the same systems he have used in the past for the new application. And we have really seen Mpower systems who were wonderful exact copies of a ChemStation. Our recommendation, and what we have done for a few customers, the groups who are working, are responsible for the application, that will be normally the people with experience. And they should define how to work with Mpower or Chromeleon or OpenLab. So what we have changed then is that we have written all SOPs the laboratories need. And instead of asking them to define their processes alone, we were going to each site after the training, and then we were presenting these SOPs. The first answer of each site was, it will not work. We will be completely different. We will do things completely different than all other laboratories. I can really say from my experience from a lot of sites, no. More than 95% will be exactly the same. There will be maybe 5% where a few adjustments will be necessary. And then we started to go to each SOP and to adopt the SOP, the necessary changes for this specific site. And that will have a few advantages. The first advantage is that the site will save a lot of time because they didn't have to write SOPs. The second point is that they not have to develop all the things on their own, that they will get SOPs with procedures which are really proven, where we know that it works, and it will be much faster. An additional point is that then all sites will use the same, more or less, the same SOPs and will work in the same way. Because otherwise, if you will have 15 sites, you will have 15 different SOPs, and all the sites will work in a different way. And that could be also a big issue. One simple and short example from Mpower again. In Mpower, there was an opportunity to log methods. To log methods is a wonderful feature because when you have developed and tested, for example, an instrument method, then you can simply log the method. And for the review process, the advantage is instead of checking all gradient tables and wavelengths and all the things, you simply have to check if it is the right method, and if it is the right method, done. And problem was, in the past, you were not able to unlock methods. But the good thing is, as long as a method is locked, you know it is always the original method. Then Waters implemented a new feature which allows you to unlock methods. But the problem is, if the sites will have in their SOP a sentence, if a method is locked, the method could not be changed, that's not true anymore. And therefore, what happens in reality is that all of our customers set up the new Empower system exactly in the same way like the old system. And therefore, it is often difficult, needs a lot of time to bring new functionalities in the laboratories. If all sites would work with the same SOPs in the same way, then you can provide together with a new version and new features, a new SOP, and then that would make it much easier and faster to bring new functionalities and new processes really into the laboratory. Our recommendation based out of that short presentation, if you have the three groups, IT, laboratory, and QA, it makes sense and it's necessary that these groups work really together and that they care about the needs of the different other groups. A second recommendation from my side would be to ensure that you keep control about the application. In control, not only in terms of deployment and availability, also control how the application is used. Have a central point for the development of custom fields and didn't allow everyone to do his own things to prevent from having 8 times the same custom field. So that was my short presentation about our experience from the CDS. If someone is really fascinated from Empower and needs more information about Empower, we will have a few Empower books outside at the reception desk. So please feel free to take one book. It is branded from Biontix because that is something we brought in the new CIFO CDS part, but we are now CIFO also with the old branding. Thank you.
Any questions?